My husband and I are both nearing our late 40s and have been united in marriage for over 24 years. We are parents to 3 children, 2 daughters, and 1 son. To maintain our confidentiality, I will not delve into excessive detail about us, just enough to clarify the context. For the initial 16 years, we experienced a blissful marriage. It was during this period that a short, ill-advised affair from my past with a former boyfriend came to light, disclosed to my husband by the ex-wife of this former boyfriend. Allow me to clarify as effectively as possible. Roughly 7 years into our marriage, I went to my 15-year high school reunion, which my husband also attended. I was a member of the organizing committee and returned home 6 days prior to the event. My daughters came with me, and my husband flew in the evening before the primary gathering. We attended the reunion, and during our stay, we resided with my parents. However, during times when my husband was absent, I reconnected with my first significant boyfriend, whom I'll call Reed, and I engaged in inappropriate interactions several times that week. At that point, Reed was married and had 2 kids. He expressed that his marriage was deteriorating and he was dissatisfied. On the contrary, my marriage was affectionate and rewarding. Reflecting on it, I think I was trying to relive some of the thrill of my youth. The years spent as a mother and homemaker in a stable marriage made me crave excitement and adventure. I loathe myself for these actions. During those 3 days, our behavior mirrored our high school days, but now we concealed our actions from both our spouses and parents. We concluded our affair 2 days before the reunion, realizing the gravity of our error. We vowed to cease all contact and continue our lives as though it never occurred. The reunion itself was successful, and I even introduced my husband to my old boyfriend and his wife. We conversed briefly, and seeing the 2 men together made me realize the enormity of my betrayal against the man who was my soulmate and pillar of support. I was consumed by guilt and felt dreadful. At that moment, I resolved never to disclose the affair to him, as it would cause him profound pain, but I committed to atoning for it. For the subsequent 9 years, our marriage was as ideal as one could hope. Throughout that time, I was driven to do everything within my capability to ensure his happiness, which I pursued relentlessly. I dedicated myself entirely to him and made sure to show my affection daily. I managed all household duties and cared for the children, so he could unwind and cherish his moments with the family after work. The guilt I bore was profound, yet I also found immense satisfaction in being a dedicated wife and mother. During this period, we expanded our family with the addition of a son 8 years ago, to my husband's delight. They developed a strong bond from his birth. To be fair, my husband is a caring father and displays equal affection towards our daughters. Everything seemed to be progressing smoothly until one day when my husband came home from work earlier than usual, indicating we needed to talk. Concerned, I feared something was amiss at his job. Instead, he revealed that he had spoken to my old boyfriend's ex-wife earlier that day. As soon as he mentioned their names, my heart began to pound, I had trouble breathing, and I felt dizzy. He explained that she had shared with him that her ex-husband had confessed to our past affair. She also informed him that her ex-husband had been diagnosed with a severe type of Parkinson's disease 6 years ago and was now in an advanced stage. They had divorced 7 years prior, which was news to me, but she and her children still assisted him as his condition deteriorated. Apparently, he was overwhelmed by remorse and had finally admitted the truth. She has remarried, but she continued to help her children assist him with groceries and basic chores since he lacked other support. To her, the affair was insignificant, but she felt ethically compelled to inform my husband, believing he deserved to know. I concur with her reasoning, although I wished she had approached me first so I could have revealed it myself, rather than surprising both my husband and me. I pleaded with my husband for forgiveness, explaining that the incident was long past and had not affected our relationship. I reminded him of our loving marriage and reaffirmed that he and our children were my highest priorities. Understandably, he was distressed, hurt, and felt deeply dishonored. He became very angry, a reaction I had never seen before. Over the next hour, he uttered harsh words and used disparaging terms towards me. I sat in silence, weeping, as I believed his every accusation. He had always been nothing but a loving man to both me and our family. After his tirade, he departed in his truck without telling where he was going. An hour later, he phoned to say he would return in the evening and asked me to prepare all the children for a family discussion, suggesting I consider what I would tell them. I questioned what he meant and implored him not to force this disclosure, as I did not want to burden our children. I argued that I should be the one to suffer for this mistake, but he insisted they deserved to know the truth about their mother. He instructed me not to speak to them until he returned. I cooked dinner for the children, but my anxiety kept me from eating. They wondered about their father's whereabouts, and I told them he would be back later, as he was working, and mentioned he had planned a family meeting for that night. They asked why, and at what time. I told them to be ready by 8:30. I texted my husband to confirm we were prepared for 8:30, and also requested he call me to discuss our approach, but he didn't call. Instead, he arrived on time, entered the kitchen where we all gathered, his mood noticeably lighter. He greeted each child warmly with a kiss and a hug, then sat down, looked at me, and asked if I would begin. Trying to speak, I broke down in tears, admitting I couldn't proceed. He then explained to the children in straightforward terms what had transpired. My daughters cried and showed anger, while my 8-year-old son appeared confused and scared. When they asked when it had occurred, I said it was years back, but couldn't specify the exact year. My son, tearfully and anxiously, asked his father if he was going to leave us. Overwhelmed with emotion, I began to cry, unsure of what my husband would respond. Fortunately, he reassured our son he wasn't leaving, but mentioned he would temporarily sleep in the spare twin bed in his room. He asked if our son was okay with that, and he eagerly agreed. My husband told the children we might face difficult times and that things between us might not be the same for a while, if ever, but reassured them that their lives would remain stable. He encouraged them to voice any concerns so we could address them together. Our marriage was profoundly affected by this revelation, and it took nearly 13 months before we began to rebuild some semblance of our relationship as husband and wife. It wasn't full intimacy, but he gradually allowed some physical closeness. This lasted for the next 3 months, but only when he felt like it. He wouldn't start anything with me, but I would push things as much as he allowed each day. Eventually, we did begin to share love again, but he struggled to look at me during those moments, and the warmth wasn't as it had been before. He shared that seeing my face reminded him of my old boyfriend, which immediately dampened his passion. I didn't fully grasp this, but my therapist explained that it's not rare. She mentioned that for some men, this is a way to reclaim their masculinity that was compromised by the affair. While this might seem selfish and one-sided to him, for some reason it's a turn-on for me, and I look forward to these moments. Still, I wish we could return to how things were before. Previously, my husband was very attentive and always made sure I was content. Now, he seems indifferent to my emotions, and I feel like he uses me to satisfy his own needs. He's told me that he won't reciprocate my efforts, if you understand what I mean. To him, I seem permanently flawed in this respect. It's odd, I know, but that's been our reality for the last 3 years. I've become accustomed to it and accepted it as our new normal. Considering everything, things were going relatively well between us until this past January. During this time, an event that should have been enjoyable ended up setting us back in our healing. The scars from the past affair were reopened, and we found ourselves even further back than before. It was then that my son came home and told us during dinner about a project his 8th grade history class was working on. The project involved tracing our family history in America as far back as possible. The teacher suggested that students might use reports from genetic testing companies, although it wasn't mandatory. He mentioned his friends were planning to use them, and he wanted to do the same. My husband suggested that we should participate, noting his interest in the subject. I smiled and agreed, and we finished dinner and watched a movie. However, my focus wasn't on the film, as I was preoccupied with a concern that could potentially jeopardize everything we had worked hard to rebuild. While I was almost certain that my husband was my son's biological father, there was a slim chance he might not be, given the timing of his conception during the alumni week when I had been with both men. After the movie, my son went to his room, and my husband and I began preparing for bed. At that moment, I asked my husband to sit down with me because I had something crucial to discuss. I then detailed exactly when the affair occurred and raised the slight possibility that our son might not be his biological child. He buried his face in his hands and then shot an angry glare at me. Uncertain of his next action, he got up, packed a bag, grabbed his shaving kit, and left. I pleaded with him to stay and talk, but he just left. Not wanting to alarm my son about what was happening, I let my husband go without resistance. I called and texted him, but he didn't reply until the next morning when he said he was coming home to discuss. I felt a sense of relief, believing we could navigate this given our past and the progress we had made. When he returned, I embraced him and urged him to look into my eyes. He hesitated, but I held him firmly, wrapping my arms around his arms and torso. Eventually, he faced me, visibly frustrated, and I told him he was the only man I've ever loved. I expressed my willingness to do anything for him, reassuring him that I was 99% sure he was our son's biological father and had only mentioned the slight risk so he was informed. He asked if I was finished, then questioned, "Why didn't you tell me this 4 years ago when I discovered your affair? Or better yet, why didn't you reveal this 13 years ago right after the affair happened? Or even better, why didn't you refrain from cheating with your old boyfriend and be a faithful wife to me and a good mother to our children?" This devastated me, and I cried, saying that I would change things if I could, but I couldn't. I could only manage my actions from now on. He then outlined what was going to happen next. He stated that the whole family would undergo ancestry tests, and if our son's test came back negative, he would be the one to inform him. Then he would divorce me, and I would grant him full custody of our son. I agreed to this, but expressed my confidence that he was indeed our son's father. I also asked if we could still share our bed and resume our relationship as before. He declined, saying I would need to sleep on the pull-out couch in our bedroom for the time being. I was disappointed but accepted it since at least he was still willing to stay in the same room with me. We all took the ancestry tests, and thankfully, the results confirmed that my husband was our son's father. After receiving the results, my husband assisted our son with his class project. He told me he felt relieved, and I hoped things would revert to how they had been, but they haven't. I'm still sleeping on the couch, and my husband has grown distant. He only spends time with me when our son is around or when our daughters are home. He has also joined a local hiking club as the vice president, so most evenings after dinner, if he's not with our son, he's out hiking with the club or working with the board. This has been ongoing for nearly 4 months, and I feel lonely and excluded. I want my old husband back, the one I had before he learned of my affair. Does anyone have any suggestions for what I could do in addition to what I'm already doing? As mentioned earlier in this post, I've done everything I can think of for him. But I haven't been able to break through his emotional barriers. I know he'll never forget what I've done and may never forgive me, but I'm willing to accept that as long as we can return to the love and mutual admiration we once shared. My feelings for him are stronger than ever, but I fear he has fallen out of love with me. Thank you for reading this and understanding my situation. Update: I'm back to quickly answer some common questions. First question: my old boyfriend and I dated during most of high school. I ended the relationship shortly after starting college because the long-distance arrangement wasn't working for us. Second question: I reconnected with him when I returned home, and that's how we got in touch. Each of us on the reunion committee had a list of names to call and confirm attendance, and I purposely chose the list with his name on it. You could say I initiated contact at the time. I wanted what happened to happen, and after it did, I felt intense guilt, which has made me a better person. Third question: my husband has never pressured me into anything. I've willingly done everything with him, and most of the time, I've taken the initiative. While I do wish he'd hold me and show me affection as he did before, I've accepted our new life and appreciate any attention he gives me. When he's happy, I'm happy. Fourth question: my husband has never cheated on me. I'm certain of this because his focus has always been 100% on his family. He is a good man, an excellent father, and the best husband. Although our relationship has changed, I'm sure most women here would envy what I have and gladly trade places with me. Update: 7 months after the original post. Hello everyone. I'm here to give you a quick update on the current status of my relationship with my husband. Sadly, my husband has decided that he wants a divorce. As I type this out, it fills me with sadness, sorrow, and regret. These have been my overwhelming feelings since he told me about his decision a month and a half ago. I did everything I could to try to change his mind, but he had already made up his mind. He shared that the past 5 years had been dreadful for him, and he assumed they had been difficult for me as well. I told him I wasn't miserable, and that merely being near him brought me happiness. I pleaded with him to reconsider, but it was evident that he had resolved to move on. He expressed his wish to start anew, hoping I would do the same. He thanked me for the years prior to my infidelity and for the effort I put into trying to mend our marriage. Nonetheless, he stated that the affair, coupled with my dishonesty and opacity, had undermined his trust in me beyond repair. Beyond the affair, he recognized that I had been an excellent mother, and he hoped we would continue to be close and cooperative parents post-divorce for our children's sake. We are settling the details outside of court, so the legal procedures will be largely procedural. We maintain such amicable relations that his lawyer even once questioned if we were certain about divorcing. I voiced my hesitation, but I respect my husband's decision. Everything should be finalized within the next year. One of the most daunting tasks will be selling the family home we constructed together, the home where we conceived and raised our children. While the sale will yield a significant profit due to increased property values in our area, I won't be able to afford a new house on my own. I'm currently looking for an apartment for myself. My husband has similar plans, but aims to buy a new place, possibly closer to his workplace. Our children are coping well, and my son has been incredibly supportive. He's truly been my rock, helping me through some really tough times. My daughters are supportive as well, but they are preoccupied with school and seldom come home. I plan to start job hunting later this year, but for now I'm taking a couple of months off to focus on personal growth. Over the past 5 years, the stress has impacted my health, leading to weight gain. My doctor has cautioned me about my rising blood pressure and weight. Unlike my husband, who exercises and eats well, I don't follow a healthy lifestyle, which has resulted in significant weight gain, especially recently. My goal is to return to my weight from when we first married. In conclusion, I want to thank everyone for their thoughtful responses and concern for my well-being. I never thought my story was that intriguing, but apparently it is. Please don't pity me, I will be fine. The darkest days are behind me, and I'm moving toward a brighter future. Who knows, my husband might change his mind or come back to me in the future. All right, that was an engaging story. Now, let's move on to another exciting one. Stay tuned, and let's dive into story 2. If I could offer one piece of advice regarding divorce, it would be to avoid it under normal conditions. In my situation, there was no grievance. We were together for 8 years, which were mostly happy, and we have 4 children. Around the 5-year mark, I received a job promotion and began to feel that my ex-husband was somehow holding me back from greater success and a better life. Although we weren't wealthy, my new salary exceeded his, and as I began working longer hours, his were reduced, so he spent more time at home. I started to resent him for being at home and for having the chance to spend time with our kids. Most evenings when I came home, the children were either preparing for bed or already asleep. After a few months in my new role, it became apparent that things at home were not going well. When I wasn't there some nights, the dishes were left undone when I arrived, or the kids hadn't eaten, and I would invariably find something to criticize him about, no matter how minor. I was angry, and the specifics didn't truly matter. He kept promising to try harder, but he also shared how challenging it was to be home all the time, which only infuriated me more. Over the next couple of years, things continued to decline. My work hours remained lengthy, and his job was intermittently full-time. There was never an ideal time for him to work full-time given my schedule, but we needed the income. Whenever he suggested he could work extra hours, I would complain. The fewer hours he worked, the more I criticized him for not earning enough. If he highlighted this contradiction, I would dismissively tell him to sort it out. I knew this upset him, so I began to say it often, using it as an excuse for many issues. I genuinely resented him and distanced myself from the relationship. I knew my actions were hurting him, but I didn't care. I thought that if he really wanted to avoid pain, he should at least try to make me happy. This was my rationale when I started talking to another man at work. Initially, he was just a friend, but our chats at work evolved into texting at home, exchanging photos and videos, and eventually we looked for opportunities to be alone together. I knew it was wrong, but it made me feel alive, which my husband hadn't done in years. I was tired of being unhappy and justified it as doing something for myself. The worst instance was when I came home early and found that he had cleaned the entire house, made dinner for the family, and picked a movie for us all to watch together. A couple of years earlier, this would have delighted me, but that night I couldn't even face him and pretended to be sick. I spent the evening in bed, where he attended to me, brought me different food, and checked on me constantly. It made me feel terrible, and then I became angry that he made me feel that way. By the end of the night, I was texting the other guy. Over the next month or two, it didn't matter what my husband did, he seemed wrong just for existing. Most days, he would become so distressed by how I treated him, and I would deliberately provoke him into losing his temper, knowing it would happen eventually. After most of our arguments, he would apologize for something I accused him of doing, if there was even anything, but I never apologized. Instead, I would find ways to make him feel even worse. I believed I was justified because he was in the wrong, and that was all that mattered to me. I even feigned indifference when he discovered my affair with the co-worker. It hurt me internally to see him struggling to hold back tears, but I refused to show any sign of care, especially when I told him I wanted a divorce. I could almost hear his heart shattering. He begged and argued that we could work through it together, but I wasn't truly interested in fixing our marriage. I had mostly ended things with the other guy, but only because I knew I could revisit it if I chose. I acknowledged his efforts occasionally, but most of the time I was incredibly harsh to him for any reason I could think of. I'm not sure what more he could have done to make me happy, aside from finding a job that paid so well I wouldn't need to work at all. He said he was searching, but searching and finding are two different things. It was around this time that I discovered this group and a few others. I started posting about him from my perspective, receiving a lot of positive feedback, which reinforced my belief that I was right. The more I posted, the more validation I got. It wasn't just me, the entire internet seemed to agree that my ex-husband wasn't worth keeping around, telling me just how awful he was. I started saying hurtful things to him and even outright ignoring him. I was so convinced of my opinion and the support of others that I contacted a lawyer, and within a few weeks, I had filed for divorce. I continued to use this website and a few others to find validation for my feelings and encouragement to proceed with the divorce, and eventually I went through with it. The process was relatively smooth. My ex-husband didn't ask for much, only that we not divorce and try to work things out. However, I was indifferent to his pleas. He was devastated, but I felt liberated, enjoying the freedom to do as I wished without feeling guilt or having to answer to anyone. This sense of liberation was incredible. However, this feeling didn't last long. In the first month after he moved out, I missed garbage day 3 times, dishes rarely got cleaned, and laundry piled up so much that I had to do the sniff test to see if clothes were wearable again. I also noticed that my children were seldom happy. My oldest had seen some messages from the other man months earlier and knew my ex-husband still wanted to reconcile. It didn't take long for her to stop talking to me, except to express her wish to live at my ex-husband's house. The other children also told me they wanted to live with him. I tried to make them happy but ended up just buying them toys all the time, which only brought temporary happiness. I was also struggling at work being alone. I couldn't work all the extra hours expected of me. Eventually, I gave in and started calling my ex-husband to watch the kids. He always came over as soon as he could, asking if I needed anything else. When I returned home, I'd find clean dishes, laundry done, and sometimes even dinner prepared. He didn't say much when I got back, just advised me to call him if I needed anything and left. He always looked so sad when it was time to go. Finally, after a couple of months, my friends convinced me to go on a date. It was for dinner and a movie, and I was initially excited and hopeful. However, during dinner, an overwhelming sense of guilt started to consume me, and it got so bad that I didn't even make it to the movie. About a week later, after shedding countless tears, I found myself on a therapist's couch. I recounted everything that had happened, starting with the work promotion. The therapist didn't support the encouragement I had received for the divorce. I ended up visiting her office 2 and sometimes 3 times a week. The more I talked to prove I was right, the more I began to realize how wrong I had been. It was truly heart-wrenching. I'm not sure if I had ever cried as much in my entire life as I did during the first month in her office after spending around $2,000 on therapy sessions. I came to realize that although my ex-husband had his faults, I had far more severe flaws. I had done so many terrible things and said such awful things that I wouldn't want to be with me, yet he had. I still remember a time when, during a meeting with the lawyer, he asked me not to go through with the divorce. However, I proceeded with it and later boastfully shared on this platform how liberated it felt. I was completely mistaken, and now I can see it. A couple of weeks ago, I approached him as he was leaving the house and asked about the possibility of getting back together. When he looked at me, his eyes welled up with tears and a few rolled down his cheeks. He explained that he didn't know if he could. He said that the pain had been too intense for too long, and he feared that if we reunited, I might hurt him again. He mentioned that he had always hoped I would realize how much he loved me, right up until the moment I signed the divorce papers. He sighed deeply, expressing that this had hurt him more than anything else, and that he wasn't sure if he could ever trust me again. I don't blame him. I essentially broke a man who, in retrospect, was a wonderful husband. I deprived my children of having a loving father at home and took his children away from him. As for myself, the one who pushed for divorce in search of happiness and freedom, I now spend most of my free time either sitting at home or on a therapist's couch. Please don't solely rely on the advice of anyone on this website or any other concerning divorce. If your marriage is going through a tough patch, start by examining yourself and consider making changes. This advice applies to both men and women. Divorce is not enjoyable, and life after divorce is not a walk in the park. Witnessing your spouse broken and your children perpetually unhappy because of your actions is one of the most painful experiences imaginable. I wish all of you the best and hope you'll give your marriages a second chance.